Hello and welcome back to your first steps in Unity. We're almost done with our game, only the user phase is left. So let's jump right in. Now creating a user interface in Unity is actually pretty straightforward. We can simply go in the hierarchy with right click, UI, and select the element we want, or we go over game objects, UI, which does exactly the same thing. I want to create a text for my score, so I simply rename it score. And Unity creates the canvas, which is necessary for the UI interface um, for me. So every subsequential UI element I create will simply be located on this canvas. So if I create the next thing, which will be the timer, it's located directly. I usually like to rearrange it to the top, so I always have the user interface on top, but you can do it wherever you want. Now, if we take a closer look to our canvas, we realize that it's actually pretty big. The width and the height are exactly the same as I use in my game. So the overall size of this element is pretty big. Now, if we focus on that, we realize that pretty fast because it's the whole thing, and our game is just in the bottom left corner, pretty small in comparison. But that's not really a problem because now we can focus on the user interface with this big object and simply stop worrying about the game itself because everything in the user interface is rendered on top of our actual game camera. The automatically created components for the canvas are pretty much good the way they are. I would just want to point out two things. First of all, the render mode for the canvas itself is currently selected to screen space overlay. If we want to use post-processing effect, we have to choose screen space camera because the post-processing effects are usually bound to a specific camera. There we can then select a specific camera which it should apply, but for now and for most cases, the overlay is fine. The second thing is the canvas scaler. This is important for us because depending on the actual device we are playing on, the screen space can differ quite a lot. So if I have an Android phone or a usual gaming monitor or browser in the web, we don't exactly know what we're going to face, so we want to make sure that it still looks pretty much the same independent of where we're playing our game. And to do that, I usually go with the scale with screen size option, where I can put in a reference resolution, um, which will be full HD. And I can select if I want to match the width or the height as best as I can to keep the resolution, the reference resolution the same. Now we can see this in action if we select our canvas. So we can check out the rect transform in the inspector, head on over to our game view and select the free aspect, which will use all the available uh, screen size and change our canvas accordingly. Now if I move it up and down a little bit, it's changing. And if I move it left and right, it's changing as well. And tries to match as best as it can the width of 1920. Now let's switch it back and focus on the actual user interface objects we are going to manipulate, which are the score and the time. Currently, these two objects are pretty much invisible. Yes, they exist and they have new text in them, and theoretically you could see them here, but compared to our canvas, they are pretty much invisible. So the first thing we need to do is change them a little bit to be more visible. First thing is the color white, so we can see them down here. Since our game is pretty much black currently, I like the best fit option, which increases the overall font size depending of the space available. And then we can of course increase the space available for them, which I think 700 in width is good, and let's say 200 in height for now. And these two are now our score and our timer. So maybe let's change them to score and to timer. Now I like a timer which is digital, so I go with let's say minutes, hours, minutes, seconds, and um, milliseconds. And now I want these two to be at a specific space. First of all, let's check if they're big enough, and score and size of them, I think it's okay. But I don't want them to just hang around in the very middle, so we have to talk next about the rect transform. Now this component is derived from transform and holds a few more possibilities. That's because the overall space in a game object is three-dimensional, while for our user interface it's only necessary to be two-dimensional. The most important thing here is the top left corner, which holds the anchor, which tells us regarding from what position we want to move, or we want these options to move our transform. So if I say center center and locate to 0, 0, we are exactly in the center with this object. Now I think I will simply change these options as well. So the overall text is exactly in the center of it as well. But the game object is now located center center, which can be okay, but I don't think it looks so great. So I will use a different anchor, which for me is the timer will be at the top right corner and the score will be at the top left corner. So I can change it to the anchor and now try to go with 0, 0. This would be one option. Or I could otherwise simply use the Shift and Alt key and help this locate for me. So I want to locate it to the corner and not this one as 0, but exactly the middle of my component shall be 0. And with this I can do it. So for the score, let's change it to center center as well. And locate it at the top right again with Shift and Alt and hit the option I want. So it can be at the left side, it can be at the top left corner. I might want to stretch it. In my case, it's just this way. And now I have the score and the timer. Now the score is a little bit wide, so I simply decrease the size to, let's say, 480. And we have our two objects in the user interface. We still need a way to start our game. So we can start the timer, we can start to move the level around, and there are multiple ways to do this. One way would be to listen to the first time we hit the space button, which is our jump button, and then simply start everything. Or we could create a button which holds something like start or so. So this is what we're going to do. Create another UI element, a button, and let's change the size real quick, 300 by 300. And inside our button, we have a new text element which holds the caption of the button itself. This one is selected to stretch to the size of the parent object, which it already does. And we can use the text go, for example. Go. Oh, go. And we can make it bold for one and go with the best fit option as well. Let's increase the size. So this button will simply act as our way to start the game. And right now we can hit play and it simply doesn't do anything, but it works as a button already. So now we need to apply the logic for the score, the timer, and the go button. To apply logic to it, we will have to create another script. So let's go to scripts and create another one called UI controller and apply it as a new component to the canvas. So this will handle everything according to user interface. Now, if we want to work with user interface options in our scripts, we want to, oh, that's a bit big, include the UI using Unity engine.ui so we can use those references and the compiler knows what to do. So first we need two variables for our two texts, which is einmal the score text and the timer text. Let's create another variable, boolean is started, and a method to change the text. Public void set scoreboard with the score we want to set. And here we can simply call the text, score text variable dot text and apply any value we want. Now we said we want score and the score, so we can simply go with score to string. And with this, we set the score whenever we call this method. We don't call it yet, but this is what we need so far. Now for the timer, we need a few things. First of all, we need a way to store how much time has already passed. So let's create a float, time passed, which starts at 0. And a way to increase this is simply in the update method, increase it by how much ever time has passed. And now if you remember one of the previous episodes, we can simply use the time.deltaTime for that. Time passed will be increased by time.deltaTime, which holds the information of how much time in seconds has passed since the last update. But we don't want to increase it every time, rather only once the game is really started. So if is started, simply increase the time. Now that we stored our information, we still need the possibility to display this information. And let's go with set timer text as a function, which we will create. And let's make it private because we're only going to use it inside this class. Set timer text. And here we need to format this value we stored. Now keep in mind the time passed is second based, so 1 second or one value in time passed will equal 1 second. And now we need to extract the minutes, the hours, and the milliseconds of this value. And to do that, we can simply use a combination of two things. First of all, let's create a variable which can store this, seconds, and use the math function library of Unity, which holds float to int. I'll explain it in a second. And go with time passed modulo 60. Now, first of all, the float to int function is a function which, as it stands there, rounds down to the smaller 2 or equal to f. So the float we are putting inside this will be cast into an integer, and it will be the next smallest number. So let's say I have 1 second and 50, 1.5 seconds have passed. This function will make it to exactly 1. And because the other part we want to extract for our milliseconds and format them ourselves. Now if we have 1.7, it will be 1 as well. 1.9, same thing. If we have 2, it will be 2. So this is exactly what we want for the seconds, but we still need to extract the seconds. So if we have, for example, 120 seconds, 22 seconds have passed, this is the same as 2 minutes and 2 seconds have passed. So we need to extract these 2 seconds. And we can do this with the modular operator, which gives us simply the rest of the division. So if we divide by something, in our case 60, the time, we sometimes have something that doesn't really fit. So we have our integer 120, 22 by 60 would be something around I don't know, oh, 1 or something. But we don't really care about the 2 minutes in this case. We only care about the seconds, so we only want the two that are missing or weren't dividable. So the modular operator does exactly this. It gives us the 2 seconds. And we can now simply do exactly the same for the minutes and hours. Minutes and hours. But first we of course have to divide by 60, so we change it into minutes beforehand, and in this case we change it into hours. And there we have seconds, minutes, and hours. Now for the milliseconds, we can use a similar trick, but uh, use modulo 1, so we only get everything behind the dot. And now we can simply multiply it by 1,000 to create a value which is uh, bigger than 0 and still a real number, which we need for the integer. And everything left to do is format them in line for our timer text. So it's timer text dot text is equal to, and now I like using the format function because I can simply format something the way I want it to. And the format function gets a string, but it can hold variables. So if I go with parentheses and put a number inside, this tells us use the variable I'm giving you with the first variable, which would be hours. And now I want these hours to be always 2 digits. Like I want 0, 1 or 0, 0 or whatever. So I have to tell this to format with this option. So I tell them use the variable I give you in the very first parameter and format it 2 digits. And exactly the same for the others. So I go with, I think, this, and now use another variable, and another variable, and in this case, 3 digits. Now, as you can see, the compiler tells me already, well, I don't have a variable for this. So, of course, I have to add these. And it's minutes, seconds, and millis. And I wrote the wrong number. 3 would be right. And now, whenever I change the text, I call this function to change exactly the time to the format I want. Now, we don't start right away, so we need still a function to call from the button to start everything up. And let's make this one, first of all, real simple, not start the game yet, but only our timer. Void. Oh, I already have the start game function. Um, exactly. Oh, and now I only need to call it. So let's switch back to Unity. Select the canvas, and we need to make sure that we have our score and our timer text applied here. So score and timer go per drag and drop here. And we go to the button and to the onClick part, add an onClick function, drag our canvas inside where we have this function located, and select our class, the UA controller, and the function start game. So if I now hit play and hit the go button, the timer starts moving up. And exactly the way I want. We have hours, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And it's exactly what I want. So, very good. And now we can switch to something else. Now, once the game starts, I want to do multiple things. First of all, start the timer, of course, then move the level to the side. And, well, the go button is a little bit distracting, so I want to disable it as well, so I don't see it anymore. So exactly this one I want to do. Now, the disabling part I can do again with the onClick function. I can simply add another object here, drag the button in, use the game object and the, where is it, setActive method. And here I can simply select what I want to do. So I want to deselect it, and if I change back to the game, hit the go button, it's simply gone. And now we still need the level to start, to move to the side. And we need our score to be increased. So we do this with a few references. First of all, the score increasing should be called from the player. So the player needs a reference to the actual UI controller, and public UI controller, UI controller, and we should use a method to change the score and not just change it by hand in the collectible where, like we did before. So let's change this one to private. And now the collectible will tell us, well, we can't do exactly this, what we already did. So we create a public function, increase score, increase by. So here we increase our score plus equal increase by, and we call the UI controller set scoreboard with our score. So the UI controller will set this with our new score exactly the way we want it to be. So we need to reference it, and we, in our collectible, need to call the function instead. So increase score by 1. We call the function. This in turn increases the score, and then the UI controller changes the scoreboard. And we can switch back and now apply the UI controller by dragging it here. And we still need to increase to start the level. So change the level to hold a function, which called as well public void start level. And here we can is change is started to true. So in the button, we can add another one, pull the level in, select the move level, and start level option. And with this, we simply hit start, go, and collect our score, which increases, our timer increases, and everything works the way we plan it to. Now, I didn't really get others, but once I finish, the time stops, since our delta time is now always 0, score stays the same, and we're basically done. And I think we're done with the series. We talked about many different things like the Unity editor, the default windows and their functions, game objects and their transform, as well as some other important components like the rigid body for physics or the box collider. We worked with C# scripts, manipulated variables, game objects, and learned about Unity functions like start, update, or onTrigger into 2D. We also went over some basics for animations and the user interface. Now keep in mind that this is only a fraction of the possibilities we have with Unity. Right now, the game is playable, but only in a very basic state. I encourage you to think about possibilities to extend it. For example, currently nothing really happens when our character moves out of the screen. Wouldn't it be nice if we see a game over message or something? Another thing is that the second we finish, everything stops. A retry option wouldn't hurt, don't you think? Or maybe a way to store the best score or track time? Everything is possible with Unity. Anyway, if you're interested in a specific topic for my next video or have any questions left, feel free to comment. I'll do my best to answer as fast as possible. Thanks for watching and I see you guys next time.